we start this week, there are times when Matt's internet drops, but it doesn't spoil what we're getting. Anyway, I'm not good enough to edit it all. So enjoy. Hello and welcome to The Guest Show. Today I've got an incredible person. I know he's part of the team, but I'm going to go an incredible person. An organisation is representing is amazing. I've been to their place. I'm going to say to you now, they're in Finsbury Park. Beautiful place. Go and visit it. You learn a lot. It's called the Museum of Homelessness. Now, let's get this straight. They don't have a homeless person in a little cubicle, so you say, oh, there's a homeless person. No. They highlight the situations, in my opinion. But I'm going to pass you on to Matt, who is one of the founders and directs, him and his partner, Jess. I've got Matt today. And really, so thank you for coming, Matt.
No worries. It's good to be here, Ian. I'm really happy to be on the guest show. It's great.
Okay, and now, first of all, this is the title, the Museum of Homelessness. What was your vision at the beginning?
Well, it's interesting you talked about the thing about a homeless person being in a glass case, and I remember our first ever event in 2017. Right, we've been developing the idea for the museum for a couple of years. I'm one of the co-founders. There's another co-founder, Jess, and we were having chats with people. We were talking about how we could do museums differently, and we're thinking about the ethics of museums, the ethics of how people are represented. So the idea, I think, a lot of things that people get, especially at street level, right? People who are affected by homeless often get upset about is when their stories are taken and photos of them are plastered all over advertising for big NGOs and stuff, and the whole poverty porn thing, right? So we were trying to steer clear of that right from the early days. And I remember I saw a cartoon made about the Museum of Homelessness as we were about to do our first ever big launch event, and it had exactly that. It had people, well, what do I expect from this new show? I'm going to see people in cases. And I remember thinking, oh my God, literally my heart fell out of my stomach or something. It's just always been something we've really wanted to avoid. So we've thought quite a lot about that in the Museum of Homelessness. Like if you check out our social media, you really don't see people who are sleeping rough depicted on there. The way we do exhibitions is that we don't have people who are kind of in homelessness situations telling their stories at all. Instead, what happens is people perhaps in those situations give us an object, and that object is what is shared. And what we do is we share the original interview that was given with that object with members of the public who come and people who have been street homeless. We're very much a community museum, a community first museum. It's a co-produced museum, produced on the community's terms. So I'll probably talk about that more, but it might explain why the Museum of Homelessness has done some of the things it's done over the years. But yeah, we have this sort of different way of storytelling, which is quite interactive, where people hear these original testimonies, these interviews that were given with objects, and they're connecting with objects in different sorts of ways as part of a kind of experience. And it's it's taken us 10 years to get to the point where we could command enough, I don't know, interest from people to get our own space. And it took 3.5 years it was blood, sweat, tears, a lot of bureaucracy to get over the line with a council. And it's thoroughly depressing. I mean, I guess I could talk about that, how we actually ended up getting a building, or I could talk about some of the unusual things we've done over the years.
I think, first of all, maybe because the unusual things were pre your home. What were the unusual things and why did you do them?
Well, yeah, I think the thing when we started out, right, the reason we started out was it was because it was the austerity decade last, 10 years ago, wasn't it? It was the time when there were so many cuts and you could read about the numbers of people sleeping rough exploding 169% or something. It was also was a time when people were thinking about museums and representation. It was the decade of Me Too, Black Lives Matter, all sorts of thinking around how are people included in society and how their stories told. And so there are lots of other museums, actually, new ones that have been set up in this kind of vein, and we're sort of one of them. And there were lots of other kind of grassroots campaigns set up as well around that time, looking at homelessness in a different way, maybe trying to move away a bit from some of the kind of ultra professionalized and managerial settings that you sometimes get in homelessness sort of situations. I think that's very much tied to like the lived experience movement around ensuring that there's more authenticity in what and how homelessness is looked at from people who've gone through the issues. And it was very important the early days at the museum was sort of developed by people who've been in all sorts of situations recently, some currently homeless, some people not homeless. So we gathered a group around us to explore what the idea of a museum could be. And this was just like occasionally, 2017, meeting up, chatting about things, sort of thinking about doing little workshops with ground early days and a few other groups, trying to find our feet right, trying to find out what works. And I am just going to pause for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Did my connection go?
A little bit, yeah. I
Yeah.
will say that beforehand anyway when these sort of
You
things
can edit,
happen.
you can edit that bit.
Oh,
If you
I wish I was
uh
that accurate. Um,
all right, don't worry about it. I'll continue
it
then.
doesn't look. I believe I said to you before, and for ladies and gentlemen listening, is it's about getting a pure voice.
Yeah. So that's
Not
why
I don't. Yeah, and people too. I've had few people, and I want to be perfect. I am perfect. Let me get that right now. But I make perfect mistakes, and here I'm just trying to get. I truly believe, for ladies and gentlemen, this is the first time. I want to get the truth.
Mm.
I don't want to get the clean paint. All right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so you're being truthful with me.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I think the museums are like a lot of perfect mistakes because they kind of direction. So I mentioned earlier the way we do exhibitions is not necessarily you
Mm.
have someone telling us. That was because someone uh Jimmy Cullen. Now you might remember Jimmy. He was a prominent campaigner. He passed away in 2017, but he actually got an OBE for his services to homelessness, and he was linked to Groundswell, and he deeply believed in the power of lived experience. And he was part of our group in the early stages, and he was the one really who said, "Now you can't do exhibitions with labels. Sorry, but that's not gonna do anybody's story justice. You're gonna have to think of a different way of doing it." And reason why we've kind of gone in that direction in terms of how we do museum heritage, the kind of museum part of it. And then also it took us along that we're not really like a super run, like a street level handout, really like a big homelessness organization, which is kind of dealing with government. We're quite small and grassroots. And it took us a while to find like-minded groups. Groups like the Streets Kitchen, the Outside Project, who we now work with quite a lot, and the Simon Community, who's archived as part of the museum's cornerstone of the museum's collection. We're more like that, really. Do a bit of the street stuff, but we do also say things to policymakers. And you don't; those are kind of. It took us a while to work out that we were kind of like that as an organization, and so we found friends and supporters. Like our first ever building, which was given to us in 2019, was actually Clerkenwell Fire Station. People don't really know
Mm.
that so much, but we were there for
I
two.
heard about it.
Yeah, we were there for 2 years. And, we we decided we'll do we're doing a show of sorts. What do people want to do? And they said, well, we want to tell people what the truths are over the last 10 years. And so it was called Truths of the Last 10. And we developed
Mm.
it. We came up with all sorts of ideas and we looked at government policy and where things were going wrong. And we opened the exhibition and literally we had one showing. The building flooded, sadly, and then we had coronavirus hit. So it was a lot of vision. And it was really like a map of some of the injustices that have been happening really in the last 15 years longer even, and how that hits the people who are vulnerable the hardest. And I think that was a turning point for the museum, and I think that's when we started to do more direct campaigning work, more calling out of power, more direct organizing. Some hadn't been so prominent in the early days. We were more focused, I think, in the early days on exhibitions, doing shows, and in different spaces. We did a lot of work, for example, in the early days. And so it's always people who've kind of gone through stuff who've influenced the museum a lot. And we've kind of taken these swerves and gone in certain slightly different directions. And in the pandemic, for example, you get a group of people together who've all kind of gone through trauma and homelessness. And the first thing they want to do is, rather than kind of locking down everyone, get together and organize and do outreach to people who are still outside. So that's what we did in the pandemic. We did that for about 18 months. We still didn't have a building at that stage. We were just sort of trying to get councils to give us community centres and going out in the West End with trolleys. It was been an interesting journey, I think, to work out like what the Museum of Homelessness is. So you're not alone in thinking like, oh, when I first heard about it, like Earth, I think it's taken us a while to find our feet, definitely.
Well, the reason I heard that was through my friend Lisa, who you had doing some of your stories, the
Yeah.
object and stories idea. And I remember when I walked in, well, there were quite a few actors you had there that I knew from my acting, from Cardboard Citizens, or performed, or I knew them anyway, through the theatre business. And I really admit, I like the idea of this podcast is stories, really, even the interviews are stories, is the idea of the stories.
Mm.
But it must be difficult to choose because we talk about the word homelessness. And I've realized when I got off the street, I'm an ex-rough sleeper. To me, homelessness when I got off the street was just rough sleepers. I've now realized my mind, although I knew it was wrong, I've had to chuck that away because we're talking about temporary housing, we're talking about hostels, squatters, the lot. But it must be difficult for you, I imagine. Maybe you can help me here, is what you focus on with the stories. Is it?
Well, well, I think one of the beauties of it is that we don't have to select the focus. Actually, we it's the person who gives the objects who chooses what they say, and they choose what they talk about. And actually, also, not all the stories are about people's direct experiences. So this is an important thing to say about the Museum of Homelessness, is that it's not the Museum of Homeless People. It is the Museum of Homelessness. So some of the people who donate objects have not been homeless. They might be involved in some way as doctors or GPs or housing officers or politicians. We've had donations from those kinds of individuals as well. It's not in the majority of objects have come from people who have gone through things. That is definitely true. But what we want to do is kind of show to people that everyone has a stake in this situation we call homelessness, right? So I think people want to know what it's like if you're a stressed out housing officer who hasn't had a pay rise for 10 years and you've got to deal with this. That perspective is also important. I think there are degrees of the experience and representation we want to privilege. So that's why there's so much focus on lived experience stories. But once we get the recorder in front of them, we have no idea what people are going to say. People have turned up with all sorts of objects over the years. We've had prosthetic legs given to us and packets of tobacco, sort of plastic bag. The plastic bag is quite a well-known story, actually, because someone, we actually had a filmmaker who made a film about the plastic bag, and the bag is all about the fact that they're your mates when you're down on your luck and you've got nowhere else to go. The black plastic bag is the thing that keeps you going, and it goes on this long tangent about how it's the unsung hero of the 80s, the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I mean, it's just brilliant because people have so much talent, right? And that's what comes out in the stories, that people have so much resourcefulness and talent and creativity. And I think we really try and celebrate that in the Museum of Homelessness. And we celebrate that because it's unappreciated, and also because it can really teach us things, especially given the times that we're in right now. Like, we're not as connected as a society as we need to be, as we should be. But often it's people at the sharp end who are the quickest to give what they have. And luckily for us, that includes the objects.
I'd agree with you about when I first got on the street. I was born in Whitechapel. Okay, and there was a big hostel there. I must admit, I did the Petticoat Lane Market on Sundays as a kid. I dodged that. I had to walk past the hostel. I always dodged past it. I walked across the road. I was scared by some of the people who came out there. And I had this judgment when I got on the street about homeless people. They all drink, they all do drugs, they're all tea leaves. That's how I judged them. I was totally wrong. And well, I don't do any of those. The only thing I do is I smoke cigarettes. So the packet of tobacco you've got on left, thank you. But I was totally wrong because I consider myself an intellectual. There were people there, okay, I'll be arrogant. They're not as intellectual as me, not as good looking as me, but they're amazing people.
Yeah,
But also the talents. I met a guy, I got given a guitar when I was 13. Forget it, I still can't play it. I'm 69 now.
still got time. Still got time,
Yeah,
Ian.
I've got time. I'm only young, but the talent that was there on the street was amazing.
Mm.
And that's what you're doing, really, aren't you? You're showing this, what I'm trying to do.
Yeah,
You show these people are amazing.
yeah. It's so true. I mean, it surprised me even at the time. It doesn't surprise me now, but if you look at like homelessness settings in general up and down the UK, I mean, there are just so many arts programs, right? There are so many poetry workshops and spoken word things and
Hmm.
visual art. We run an open studio here every week on a Tuesday. I think you came by, didn't you, Ian? And you saw it.
Yeah.
And so people, yeah, the creativity you find is amazing. And yeah, it's just something that I think you can do a lot with that. You just have to find the ways to tap into those talents, right? We were really lucky actually that we don't not just the objects, but we've worked with a lot of artists who've got, you know, real talent. People like Justin Surfing Sofas, who is our current poet in residence. People like David Tovey, who you'll probably know, Ian.
I know David, yes.
Yeah, so David's a really prominent figure, isn't he? Is as an artist, very
Mm.
widely known, and so we learned from people who have come through. And the museum has, we have long-standing relationships with artists actually over many years, because of that. Yeah, because of there's so much. It's a two-directional thing. I think it's the museum tries to say as well is that it's not really a participant. It's not really like a that people aren't really beneficiaries or participants so much. It's much more like being part of a kind of creative community, really. Jess, my co-founder, always says that we're not really building services here. We're building community. So when you come to Museum of Homelessness things, people don't really wear lanyards, like the thing around your neck. They do, it's we don't have direct access, but we do make sure that what the work that we do is connected with people and that people can kind of select how they're involved in a way. I think people in services often don't have the choice that they would like. But I think being creative and having the opportunity to do some gardening here like gives people that agency, and gives people the chance to say, oh, this is how much I want to be involved with this Museum of Homelessness. I don't want to be that involved, but they could go be involved a bit more if they wanted to be. So that's kind of
I know that when I visited last time, what's it, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, that's why I saw that gentleman who I met the first time I was on the street. He called me by my surname. Nobody calls me by my surname. But what I found interesting was I spoke to a few. Now, most people talk to me for some reason. Maybe it's the gut. But how I felt welcomed by people I didn't know, which is important, I think, especially a place like you're running, I feel.
Mm.
And that's what you provide, that atmosphere. There's no sort of like, I've gone to places, okay, to give talks. And I don't even feel like I'm there, the untoken person there. to that point. Once I've given my talk, you don't exist. I wasn't there to give a talk. I was there to rob your bank. But
That's interesting.
yeah, the bank bit's interesting. You haven't got one. But it is the welcoming side that I found really knocked me out by it more than anything. Although I knew a few people, I talked to one of your managers and I spoke to one of your volunteers for a few minutes. I always want to know about people anyway. But there was no sort of like, why is he talking to me?
Mm.
Sort of thing that I do get when I interview some people. And I'm talking about here, it's different. I'm talking about out in the general world. And that's what you've done with that place. And I would say, what I want to, with my, I have a mailing list. People, please join it. Um, is is I don't see it as a mailing list of people. I see it as a family.
Yeah. I can see that actually in all your newsletters actually.
You know, and the style of the newsletter is a casual style. I could, all newspapers have a certain form of. When I wrote for the Pavement, very formal, very explanational. None of I got in some of my little gags, so I can't accept. I can't do that. I've got to do that for myself, but I want to make it casual. And you've actually done it. I think you've reflected it in what you're doing at the museum.
Yeah, it's got to be I think yeah, it's so interesting you use the word casual and like family orientated and I think hospitality. Like I mean, come on, I mean this is a homelessness setting, right? Hospitality has got to be like top of the list to get right because you know people notice when it's not there. They don't necessarily notice it consciously, but people feel it straight away, like they know. And that comes from years of experience, right? Our community have a lot of years of kind of going in and out of different settings and knowing if they're safe or not. It's just that that's the
Mm,
way it is. And I'm sure you could speak to that, Ian, very well. And then the casualness, I think, is about just having a bit of, yeah, I think that, like, for example, I'll give you a story of how it's casual. So we have this pond in the back, which we restored. It used to be there when we got our building, there's big grounds in the back, a big garden, and there was an old pond, which was the whole back was overgrown, and we spent the last year really kind of landscaping it, and we also decided to restore the pond, and it's so casual at the museum that I would say Jess has got really into the pond and she regularly scoops out the silkweed at the bottom and her and our community gardener Taffy got in the pond literally the other day. And and then they took one of the museum dogs in there, the pig as well. And the pig went for a swim, and everyone was there. It didn't matter who you were, if you're a volunteer or you were just someone there to hang out or a member of staff. We didn't really have that many staff. We only have 3 people on the staff, but you know what I mean? It's like it's just community life unfolding, right? And it was casual. It's not too structured in that regard. And I think that's really important to help people feel like it's an authentic place that they want to come back to, really.
mm.
Or that they're already part of it and it's just something that they've kind of seen before, maybe in a slightly different way. But yeah, it's that was really funny. We might put a video on social media of it, which we're currently choosing the music for. So look out for it. If you don't listen to
Yeah,
all the
I
podcasts,
thought
you
about
will see
going on YouTube, but I don't want to scare too many people.
that.
Um, okay. How difficult was you mentioned before at the beginning that getting this place in Finsbury Park, which is a beautiful, I'll still say go there. Tuesday, you do these tours, all right? But also just to experience the place is amazing.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
just to correct, so the Tuesday tours is actually Tuesday's actually community day. So that's basically where there's the activity that we do, which is mostly like within the community for the community. So that's like where we do gardening art, a community meal. So people welcome to come along and get involved with that. The more kind of like public facing museum experiences are on the weekend. So it's
okay.
kind of like half community, half public is kind of how it's split out. But to your question about the building, yeah, it was really There's something interesting in here, maybe for listeners, about what it is actually like to try and get access to community spaces in general, like in society. It's really hard. I think the mechanism that used to be used that the mechanisms that used to be used just aren't there. Do you know, like there's something in our archive from an organization called the Goulburn Centre, which was set up in Kensington in the 50s. It was like a new kind of homelessness centre. Um, and it was very grassroots. There's not much about it that's in documentation, but we've got some stuff in our archive. And they literally put ads in the newspaper to get given spaces. People, so someone that I've took a step back, take a step back. So someone thought in the 50s that it was possible, it's perfectly logical to put an ad in the paper and expect to be given a space in return. How crazy is that? You'd never have that happen nowadays. Space just isn't available. I mean, that was the era of bombed out London. There were just more buildings around. There was more skippering, more squatting. But now, of course, you've got all of these kind of very, very bureaucratic mechanisms to get spaces, and councils aren't even able to manage their community buildings, and so you see buildings going empty, or you see communities not just really getting access to the spaces they need. And this building took us years and years to get. We were searching London, looking for a space. It was about looking at shop fronts that wanted to charge us, £50,000 upwards for a year's, rent, which we're a tiny organisation. We can't afford that. There were also encounters with developers who were working with councils, and they were kind of developing affordable housing. And developers, you probably covered this on the show.
Sorry, the word affordable is the one word I hate.
Well, yeah, 80% of market rent is very affordable for most people, isn't it?
Unaffordable, I would say, for most people. What you look. I'm on my pension. That's it. The podcast is funded out of my pension at the moment. That's why I've got to go into bank robbing. But
Use that, cover that on another episode.
that's another episode. It's called How to Rob a Bank in 3 Easy Lessons. I know a few years ago, I know a few guys who used to do this sort of thing. And that's not a nice story. But seriously, if you look at the market at the moment, what people can afford is most people can't afford it.
No, the situation's awful, and yeah, these are well documented. Rental crisis, particularly here in London, but much of it elsewhere. Actually, I saw some research from Acorn which said that rents, even if we do build this 1.5 million housing that the new government are talking about, it will only really reduce rents by about 2%. But actually, already in the last year, rents have risen 7% outside of London. So I think we have a lot of pressure on the rental stock. If you are renting, especially, I mean, if you're in receipt of benefits situation, I mean, they had local housing allowance were frozen for 4 years, weren't they? Up until recently. I think I saw some research a couple of years back that the Bureau of Investigative Journalism did that said that 94% of rental properties, if you're on benefits, local housing allowance, are unaffordable to you, depending on the area that you live in. I mean, this is a bit of a segue, really, but just to say that some of the way the developers get their buildings built is to use cultural organizations, and we had a couple of offers of very, very undesirable places for 2 years or a year, where we might get a chance to temporarily set up the museum to make them look good. That's sort of the environment and climate that we're in. Rents
There
are
is a story I'll tell you, which I've mentioned before on the podcast. I went to interview somebody in Elephant Castle for a newsletter I run. And after that, I went back, and behind Elephant Castle, there was this big building being built. And I saw this copper there. And I said to him, looks big, doesn't it? He says, well, and he said to me, and I knew it already, 10% of that building was offered as social housing. Who could afford it? The following day on the radio, that 10% had been withdrawn. They can't afford to offer it.
Hmm.
And that's the reality, unfortunately, in this world.
Yeah, it's a sad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because this plan is for the government is they're going to do in partnership with private builders. And my fear is they'll do the same thing as that building. Oh, we'll give 10% social housing, and they get the planning permission, they build it, and then they say, we can't afford to give her social housing.
Hmm.
But I'm doing something about that anyway. I'll talk to you about that another time later on.
Yeah, thank you. We covered it in our own. We do our own podcast called Deep Dive, which we were looking at private developers and their track records and how they squeeze out of the quotas that they say they're going to build. There's all sorts of loopholes that they use.
Mm.
We don't want to build on brownfield sites. It's too hard, or oh, it's too hard to make the environment green as well. We've got to take away some social housing in order to make it. Do you know what I mean? It's so frustrating. But yeah, another episode. But I mean, there is some hope because for us, we were able to strike up a conversation with Haringey Council about this building, Manor House Lodge in Finsbury Park, just on the Manor House station side of the station of the park, sorry, the Manor House side of Finsbury Park. And it had been sitting empty for many years. But luckily, Streets Kitchen had been given use of the building for a while, and they're a grassroots outfit who do about 11 different handouts around London, and they're very outspoken actually. So they do a lot of direct campaigning work as well. And anyway, they were storing things in the building, but they couldn't really make use of it. And John, the founder of Streets Kitchen, at the time, he was like, I think slightly perplexed at what we were doing and confused by the Museum of Homelessness because we've been working together during the lockdown. And after the first wave of lockdown, to keep the connection going with people in North London where we were doing a lot of work on the streets, we started to take, it was a time when the rule of six was coming. So people were going out and about again, and there was less need to be doing daily work on the streets. And so, we need to keep the connection going though. So how about we take the museum to the streets? So we would start setting it up once a week on Highbury Corner. We had the plinths and everything, and the objects on the plinths, but we're just, people were cycling their bikes through the museum's display. It was brilliant. And I think he just took one look at what we were doing and goes, we've got to get this Museum of Homelessness inside. This is ridiculous what they're doing. And setting up once a week on Highbury Corner, these objects and all these plinths. And so he said, why don't you try and use this building, the lodge? It's, I can set up a chat. And luckily, Jill Taylor, who was the Strategic Commissioner for Homelessness and Housing, she's really an amazing person. And, just so knowledgeable and insightful. She really did an amazing job at Haringey while she was there. She left within the last year, but she was kind of widely regarded for her work around homelessness and dying, about making sure that councils have good properties. She oversaw loads of really positive changes in Haringey. They became leading really in a lot of ways around things like safeguard adult reviews and public inclusion. Anyway, she was super keen that the museum move in because we're not like a commission service, where that's taking government funding to deliver services. Were kind of slightly different. And I think she was interested in different kinds of organizations being in her borough. And so she knew that the building that we're in was sort of not being used properly. It was semi-derelict, really. And so we kind of the hope part is that if you're able to reach the right people and have the right kinds of conversations, people really get behind things and positive things can happen. And it took a long time to kind of get a promise from the council that they would give it to us and then to raise funds in order to kind of, once we got that, we were able to tell funders that, you can support this. This is a really tangible thing we're going to be doing over the next few years to get behind it. And luckily, a few of them did. And then all of a sudden, we were able to move in and we've done loads here. And it shows that it's still possible to make things happen, even if I wasn't able to put an ad in a paper and get given this building. It's still possible.
So what's the future?
I think the immediate future is to consolidate what we're doing here. We've only been open to the public 2 months. Before that, we were open for our community, doing the weekly Tuesdays and other things, lots of other things. And I think it's been quite a ride, to be honest, to get to this point. I mean, it's been like some people who work in the museum, though, none of us have a house. And this is a 2-story red brick building. And so when we moved in, I think everyone just kept walking around all of the different rooms in here. Because it's very much like an old gatekeeper's house. So there are lots of tiny little rooms where it used to be, a residence. And everyone, no one has an upstairs or a downstairs who works at the museum. Everyone's in a very small studio or a flat or a boat or something.
Or a tent.
Yeah, you're a 10. Everyone was just kind of like squatting. Everyone was just very sort of overwhelmed with it all, really. And it's taken a little while to settle that down. But we had to do things like we had to get in and we had to get our stuff unpacked. And then we had to set up the opening. And so I think the next year or two will be about consolidating what we've done, bedding in, settling things down a little bit, because we've all been working very hard. And also things are really difficult. People come to the museum, both locally and from further afield, and they want answers, or there's a lot of distress around for people. And so we're trying to like really be a community glue for a lot of people. And that's taking time and energy. And so we want to give that to the community. And so there'll be, I think, a settling period where we sort of consolidate what we've done and settle things down. And after that, I think, God, we'll have to start looking at the lease renewal. We've got 10 years. Um, so, we'll have to sort of go back to that. I don't think
Yeah,
we'll,
well, if you look at your history, that you've been going, look, yeah, almost 10 years.
yeah.
And bang, it's like this is a baby
Mm,
compared to, but I'm quite pleased with what's happening with the guests. I'm
mm.
getting I feel the right guests. I've got some amazing people coming up about ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to cover loads. I've got somebody in New Zealand coming on about domestic abuse in children.
That's
It's something I
amazing.
want to look at. And she's interested. I sent her what the podcast is. She's interested. And it's all about telling the story, which you're doing constantly,
Mm.
you know. But I can understand when things suddenly, as I said to you at the beginning, up to Friday, it was okay. I was really looking forward to it. I've got 3 interviews this week. Usually I get 1 or 2, and then it's a load of research every day. Bored with the research, but I've got to do it still.
You need a researcher.
I need a research. A friend of mine offers to me, but unfortunately, it's got me that's got to interpret it.
Yeah, it's always the way.
You know, he is going to look at all the mental health. He's trying to look at that subject, which I think is interesting.
Well, I think it's really interesting because that's the one of the, I'll be honest, like with the a lot of the things that weren't mentioned, like for example, homelessness wasn't mentioned in the King's Speech. We need to ask some questions about what the government are going to do. But mental health, that's kind of what's happening there. They're going to potentially reform that act from 1983. It's quite interesting, I think. And I think a lot of the campaigning from people within the autism community, specialist campaigners that have really
Mm.
been doing some amazing work there. Hopefully, I mean, it's the money to deliver it. I don't know if that's that, and that's the problem with a lot of what the new
And the
government
other
is
thing
saying.
is,
But still,
uh,
positive.
the last government was talking about looking at PIP. Now they've actually said they are going to look at PIP. I hope that green paper they published before the election was going to just disappear into the great big sky, but it hasn't. And there are a few people. I spoke to somebody yesterday. She's going to come and talk about how a parent deals with a child with special needs,
Mm.
which I think is an interesting subject. But she admits her daughter, who has fatigue syndrome of some sort, is scared of losing her PIP.
Yeah.
The government hasn't explained enough. Ladies and gentlemen, I've written an email to the government last week. The main question is, are they going to work what the previous government is towards eradicating street homelessness? And we're going to see who I spoke to. I had an email with Matt Downey of Crisis because he usually knows it. He agrees there's nothing being done on it. But he's given me a hint of who could be the homeless minister coming up. But who knows?
We shall see. I know. I mean, to your point about PIP, I think the sanctions regime, the sanctions thinking that happens is such a shame that also for people. I think it's really worth acknowledging that. It's something that people within the museum's networks who are on PIP, um, it's just for people. So I think it's important to say that. So there's so much change that needs to happen, and yeah, on homelessness, I know there's talk of reviving the rough sleepers unit. That was the subject of our podcast. Well, one aspect of our deep dive. Our podcast is called Deep Dive, the museum's podcast, and we were deep diving into the Rust Sleepers unit of old, one that existed at new late years, and they're talking about bringing that back, and just the problems with like what would that look like to bring that back now, because I think in a nutshell, what we were saying really is that the unit of the early 2000s, which people talk about being successful at bringing the numbers of people down to the 500. That was successful because there was a functioning system around it, which enabled people to accommodation and specific programs. That doesn't really exist. So the
No,
question
they
is,
seem
how?
to. Yeah. What days does your podcast cut, or where is it? What I'm going to say to you, Matt, maybe an idea would be is if you send me the link to your website, which I know you've got a website, I've only got a balloon, and also a link to your podcast.
Well, listeners can find us Deep Dive Museum of Homelessness on Spotify. But do you
Yeah.
know what? Because it's a new podcast, it's the search returns on it are not fully synced. I don't know if it's been indexed or anything properly yet, but I will send you link everyone, Ian, with
Well, I'll
everyone in.
share with you now. This is the second incarnation of a podcast. The first one was called Bin of Words. You won't find it. It was my own, because that's what I call my writing, Bin of Words. I do words. I only had 3 guests on it, which was Matt Downey, Nicola, who you know,
Yeah.
from Public Support, and a friend of mine called Ross. We're getting a hold of him now. It's like getting up with God. And that was it. Mostly it was me talking all the time. And I don't think that's not effective. Even though I'm amusing and clever,
You
no.
are.
Yes, see, I'll send you the check later on. But this version is more stronger. But getting it in there, I only realised I was ill. That's the reason why it closed down. And I started looking it up. Bin of Words. I found one recording. The experiment, not the true recording. So, and that wasn't on. That was a general podcast search engine I used. So it is different. It's just getting time. But if you send me the link, that would mean people can start following it that way and do like it. So I've got a few people who follow me. Mostly it's through the mailing list that I create. That might. So, we've got to help each other. You can just send
We've
me
got to help each
1,000.
other.
Yeah, you send me £1,000, you've helped me, thank God. But no,
Yeah, yeah.
I
We could get a podcast weekend going at the museum or something, like because we do.
yeah, but
It's a nice vibe, so you can do like
I
a
said before I visited you that the first time I visited you was when you was before you were open.
yeah.
So there was interesting people there. I always find people interesting anyway. But next time I really came to see Nicola and you. That was the reason. So I saw Gary, who I've known for years, straight. That was a good lesson to meet him again. And I spoke to Nicola. I met somebody from Street Kitchen who might be coming on. I've known John for years. Don't think I get on with him. Don't get on with everybody.
No.
But also I spoke to you. You were apologetic. You didn't have to be. You're a very nice person.
Well, I think you were trying to get an answer about the appearing on the podcast, and I think it's just been a lot of delays with well, just time as you're opening a new building. It's one of those times where you work in never get a break. But I wanted
But
to apologize because I've kept you waiting a long time. Just impatient.
I'm very patient. You know, I'm so patient. I'm still waiting for my breakfast to arrive. And what is it? It's almost 3 o'clock. Um, but I think that is. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to say to everybody, first of all, thank you, Matt. But I'm saying everybody, definitely visit this place. as is rightly. I've been on Tuesdays. Never been a weekend. Maybe next time I come the weekend.
Yeah, let us.
But
Always welcome anytime as well.
and that's it. People are welcome there. And how many times you go into a place? I'm sure all of you listening, you've gone there, and somebody's invited you, and like my guest last week said, she spoke, and then she was ignored. Nobody should be ignored. Not in my world, anyway.
No.
Unless we're Arsenal supporters, there's a difference. There's a reason for this. But thank you very much, Matt. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the Museum of Homelessness. Maybe they'll come back again, or I might appear on there. Who knows? Doesn't matter. I would say they're doing amazing work. They are incredible people. Go and visit the place if you're in London. As Matt said, if you go there, you should go to Manor House Station, and then you go into the park, Finsbury Park, and they're just a few yards in. I won't say meters. I'm too old to say meters. So that was the guest show for today. If you have any comments to make, or you want to contact me about something, maybe you have a story you want to share, contact me. I'm always willing to listen. Plus, I advise you to join my mailing list. Matt alluded to the newsletter. One thing, when somebody joins, although I've got a template of the basic stuff, I always try and make it personal. I think it's important, the human touch. But I've never, I hope, I'll say I hope, I'll never be snobbish enough to say I haven't got time for somebody. I might not be able to see you straight away or talk to you at that very second. That's reality, unfortunately. But I will talk to you because that's me. And if you want to contact me, you contact me on my email, which at the moment is my personal email. Ian Kalman, that's spelled India Alpha November, Kilo Alpha Lima, Mike Alpha November at gmx.com. And have a good week. Hi, I hope you enjoyed that. Now the difficult part for me to talk about is I actually do need some investment. Not a lot. £1 million would do. No, seriously, what you can afford to do. So I've created Buy Me a Cup of Coffee. Now I've got a choice of what I could do. So I chose $5, $10 and $15. $5 works out at £3.84. $7 $5 is about £6.5, £7. $15, £11. Now I know we're all in financial trouble at the moment. I'm lucky I've got enough food. I loaned some money for food to last me until Friday when I get my pension. Then I've got the bills to pay, and some of the bills go to the guest, to my podcast. Very important. I will not give up the podcast. It's an old man doing his hobby, but I think it's a vital thing, and I want to do more. I have dreams for this podcast, and I'm pleased the way it's going. I'm now covering subjects I'd never thought. Example, Thursday night at 11 p.m. I'm to a lady in New Zealand. She's written books about child abuse. An important subject, isn't it? Happens. You've heard already about Pip. I'd love to do more about Pip. I had Neil on last year. And in September I've already planned to bring a load of specials on under the title Real Lives, which I did earlier on. And Real Lives is more not guest show based, it's subject based. And what I hope to cover is I've got one person going to look into mental health. How important is that today and age? I've got another person, when I spoke to her, who's going to look into services, but I've asked to look into where there's lack of services. Another gentleman's going to talk about homelessness, the hostel system to move on. We've sort of discussed that more. That's going to come. And another one I want to do, and I've got to find somebody to do it, because I don't want to be the introducer and general and everything, which I do already, is the interpretation of the word homelessness. As I said earlier on, I think if you ask the general public, and some of you are not, and most of you are not general public, what is a homeless person, they'll point to a guy on the street, and how many areas there are now. Got an idea who I might get to do that for me. If not, I will do it myself. So the new era will be starting it'll probably be starting in October. I know put in my newsletter September. It'll probably start in October, because there's loads of these things don't take 2 seconds to do. I'm lucky, I suppose, because I do my research with everybody who comes on in some way, and sometimes I'm not prepared. I'll admit, there are research where anybody who does it knows it takes you on a maze, and then you've got to find the right area. I am hoping eventually to get the homeless minister on when he comes on. There's other people. I'm actually breaking my word now, which I told somebody once I'd never do. I'm going to try and bring the political people on, but also it's meeting more people, getting more connections. So you'll see the tag for buy me a cup of coffee. If you can manage it, please do. I'm not going to force you. If you join the newsletter, that doesn't mean you won't get all the stuff the newsletter people do. I'm looking at what to offer people who join, who donate money. I've got nothing. Send a cup of coffee. Well, first of all, a cup. Well, I've got to buy a cup first of all. I haven't got money for that. I as I said before, I fund this podcast out of my pension. The basic fee at the moment every month is about, I get by with paying out about £40, but there's something else I wanted you to do. There's certain publications I need. I can get one view at one article on these publications, the rest I can't. Also, LinkedIn has been an incredible resource for me for finding people, and I get a lot of people look at me. Until I become a member of them, I can't see who they are. That's £54 a month. Now that might seem a waste of money, but it will open up doors for me. I'm quite lucky. This morning I saw somebody talk about, he'd done his first thing radio. I saw what he was doing. I thought, want him on. So I chased him. He's coming on now. We're going to talk. I sent him the details. What my process is normally with people I approach, I don't say, come on, you brother, come on, this is the place for you. No, I do a soft sell sort of thing. And what I say, look, let me send you a link. I'll add you to my mailing list. But also I'll send you the details. And then you decide whether this is the place for you. Actually, on Friday I had somebody, as you know, I lost my, and some of you might know, I lost my other mailing thing. Disaster, I lost that. And she's been trying to contact me about coming on. And this company won't give me my mailing list. I think that's illegal, but there's no body that will look in, defend me. I've got no mailing list. So I'm sure I'm missing people. I really got to sit down, go through all my messages, which I did already, but I put I missed people out. I just remember actually yesterday I realised I missed out the CEO of Connections and Martins. I never sent any details. I had a name there in my mailing list, but no details. So 2 things I ask you: please support the podcast if you think it's good. You can always tell me what you feel is the weakness.
I think it's a good product if I look at it that way. Always give me feedback. I don't get enough. A friend of mine, Neil, he's going to work on a survey at some stage, which I'm going to send out. And it's, it's what's good, what's bad, what do you like about it, what don't you like about it. Unfortunately, I'm not perfect. I try and do the best job I can. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I hate asking for money, number one. Let me tell you that straight. But it's a necessity. I've got to buy a new microphone. And, sure, I can buy a cheap lump of, I won't use the word, but I want a good one. Brings the quality more. I've got to look at, I do want to travel the country. I want to go and talk to people in their environment. I want to see what the environment is like. I live in London. The world doesn't stop in London. Well, it should do. We know that. But it doesn't. So, give me the opportunity to travel. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good week. And I hope to hear from you. Bye.